Artaxias II was born sometime around the mid-1st century BC. He was the eldest child of Artaxias II, the King of Kings of Armenia. Artaxias was named after his great-grandfather, and the founder of the Artaxiad dynasty, in which the Kingdom of Armenia was revived from Seleucid domination. Not much has survived or been recorded regarding the early life of Artaxias II, but we do know that he had two younger siblings. A brother named Tyrant, the third of his name, and a sister whose name has been lost, although her impact would prove the finishing touch of the Artaxiad house. Artaxias II most likely had, with lack of a better term, a normal upbringing in the Armenian court, located at Artaxata, a city which bore he and his great-grandfather's name. In 34 BC, the life of the Artaxiad family would change forever. Roman general Mark Antony invaded Armenia and arrived before the walls of Artaxata in under 2 weeks. Artaxias, with no hope of defeating the Romans, would soon surrender, leaving himself and his family to become hostages of Antony and Cleopatra. Either on his own accord or on the instructions of his father, Artaxias managed to flee unseen by the Roman besiegers. Exiting Artaxata, he continued east, in the direction of Rome's greatest rival, the Parthian emperor. After a harrowing journey to Ctesiphon, Artaxias arrived at the court of King Phraates IV of Parthia. Informing him of the situation, Phraates was moved by the prince, but even more so, he was excited by a chance to remove Roman influence from his border. Whilst Artaxias was on his way to Ctesiphon, his family was on their way to Alexandria. Here they were a centerpiece in a triumph in which at the end Artaxias' father, Artaxias, was supposed to swear fealty to Antony and Cleopatra and become their puppet king in Armenia. However, he refused, likely to save the life of the young Artaxias. So, it was destined to be that Artaxias, his wife, and his youngest son, Tyrant, were to spend their lives imprisoned in Egypt. For Artaxias, this was quite literally cut short. Antony and Cleopatra, desperate for allies after the disastrous naval battle of Actium in 31 BC, took Artaxias' head and gave it to his rival, the king of Atropatene, whose name was also Artaxias. Artaxias of Atropatene was also allowed to conquer a small part of Armenia bordering his kingdom. However, the Egyptian Atropatene alliance was all for naught, as Alexandria fell in 30 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra killing themselves in order to not face humiliation at the hands of Augustus. In place of his two rivals, Augustus took their children, Ptolemy Philadelphus, Alexander Helios, and Cleopatra Selene, back to Rome. Yet another prize, sitting wrapped in chains, was Tyrant III, the brother of Artaxias. He also took him back to Rome, and he joined Octavian's many other living political pawns. As Egypt had fallen, so too would Atropatene, although not at the hands of Rome. With Parthian backing, Artaxias moved to take Armenia, the only thing in his way being a few Roman garrisons stationed in his homeland, and his father's rival, Artaxias of Atropatene. Artaxias and the Parthians overran Atropatene with ease, Artaxias being captured and imprisoned in the process. To replace him, King Phraates placed a man named Asinalis on the throne. A mysterious figure. We don't know who his parents were, or anything about him up until this point. As evidenced by his coinage, however, I would venture to say that he was a member of the Artaxiad dynasty, as his coins look more similar to Armenian ones than Atropatene ones. This is also supported by the fact that Artaxias, the crown prince of Armenia, was allied to and on campaign with the Parthian king. Extending this loyal family's allegiance would have been a smart move for Phraates. From Atropatene, the king of Parthia also restored the Armenian lands that Artaxias I had taken, handing them directly to Artaxias. As the pair marched into Armenia, Artaxias was given the go-ahead to storm his namesake city of Artaxata. Inside the Armenian capital was a Roman garrison, who, keep in mind, was not supported fully by the locals. After a quick siege, Artaxias and the Parthians broke into the city and followed this up with a massacre of every single Roman inside, even the non-combatants. With his capital restored, it is probably here where Artaxias II is formally crowned as the king of Armenia, although at this point he didn't even control half of that kingdom. After this, Artaxias, his Parthians, and his Armenians went forth to reconquer the rest of his inheritance. At every single city and fort where a Roman garrison was present, Artaxias ordered massacre after massacre of all the Italians. It appeared that the new Armenian king hated Rome, and rightfully so. Rome had betrayed his father's alliance and even killed him. This was a revenge campaign, but the anger didn't cease once it was over. King Artaxias proceeded in hunting down every last Roman, even persecuting native Armenians who had assisted them in any way, even those who had no choice in the matter. This witch hunt would last the entirety of his reign, overshadowing any good he might have done for Armenia, other than reconquering it, that is. While Artaxias had rescued Armenia with help from Parthian muscle and vassalage, there was still one thing that he hadn't reclaimed from Rome: his brother. Not only was Tigran III his little brother, but he was also his primary heir, as Artaxias had no children of his own. Without Tigran, the future of Armenia past Artaxias was uncertain. With this in the back of his mind, Artaxias began sending heartfelt letters to Rome, pleading for Tigran's release. Augustus received these letters, but not before hearing of the cruelty Artaxias had committed against every Roman in Armenia. There was nothing Artaxias could give Augustus that could replace Tigran's value, besides submitting to Roman vassalage. And Artaxias simply could not do that, unless he wanted to be crushed by the same Parthian king who had just helped him. Stuck between the future and his present, Artaxias froze, becoming inactive in the middle of two emerging superpowers. Around the same time Artaxias was sending pity letters to Rome, a familiar face appeared in front of Augustus, pleading his own case. This was none other than Artavasdes of Atropatene. Somehow, shortly after he was taken hostage, he escaped and swiftly made for Rome. While Augustus was in no place to invade Atropatene and retake it for Artavasdes, he did have an opening for him. Just west of Armenia, and on the border of Rome and Armenia, lay the kingdom of Sophene. Sophene, also known as Lesser Armenia, was, as the name suggests, a majority Armenian land, although with more Greek influence, and it was separate from Armenia proper. In the same year that Artavasdes was deposed as the king of Atropatene, he became the king of Sophene. This likely angered Artaxias even more, but he could do nothing, as an invasion of Sophene would mean all of Rome bearing down on him. The status quo of Roman persecution continued indefinitely in Armenia. In 22 BC, the mystery king of Atropatene, Asinalis, passed away. Surprisingly, he was succeeded by the son of Artavasdes, the now king of Sophene. His name was Ariobarzanes II, and he was ready to continue the increasingly revenge-filled plot shared between Atropatene and Armenia. In 20 BC, the longtime rival of the Artaxiads, Artavasdes, the king of Sophene, would pass away at 39, after ruling as a king in two separate countries for 33 of those years. As for the fate of Sophene, we do not know who the next king was, but it did linger as an independent entity for the next 37 years, possibly under a younger son of Artavasdes. Artaxias, for his one achievement of reclaiming Armenia, was not a good king to his people. He never forgot about the Roman betrayal and continued persecuting Armenians even a decade after he retook his homeland. The nobility of Armenia became ever more worried by this, as some of them were forced into helping their invader. With no sign of Artaxias' anger simmering anytime soon, many of the nobles gathered to discuss options. They came to a bleak conclusion. The only way to get rid of Artaxias was to somehow get his brother back in Armenia. And the only way to do that was to let Rome back into Armenia. So, the nobles wrote to Augustus, describing their situation and promising to let Tigran III rule as a Roman vassal. All the emperor had to do was deliver him to them. The nobles would do the rest. Summoning a large army to escort Tigran, Augustus entrusted the legions to his adopted son, the future emperor, Tiberius. Taking passage by boat and landing somewhere in the Levant, likely Antioch, the legions set out in the direction of Armenia. They weren't even halfway there when they got the news. The nobility of Armenia did their part and took care of their tyrant, convincing one of Artaxias' servants onto their side. He killed the king by means of dagger.